The sun was setting, painting the street in a dull orange glow as people hurried along the sidewalk, trying to finish their day before darkness settled. The city noise was a mixture of engines, footsteps, and impatient horns, but one sound cut through everything. The sharp, echoing thud of a man being slammed against a concrete wall. Manny Pacquiao's shoulder hit the wall first, a dull ache shooting down his arm as dust drifted off the faded gray bricks. Two cops towered over him, both wearing smug grins and uniforms that seemed a size too big for their egos. They didn't speak politely. They didn't ask questions. They didn't even check properly who they were talking to. Instead, one officer grabbed Manny by the collar, pulling him closer as if asserting ownership of the very air he breathed. "You hear me?" the cop barked. "Stay in your lane, old man." The other cop laughed, loudly, carelessly, shamelessly. It was the laugh of a man who knew he could get away with anything simply because he wore a badge. It echoed down the alley, bouncing off the walls like a taunt. Passers-by slowed, some pretending not to see, while others watched quietly, recognizing something strange in the situation but unsure whether to intervene. Manny didn't resist. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't announce who he was. He simply stood there, breathing steadily, his calmness alarming in a moment designed to crush spirits. "Look at him," the second cop sneered, pushing Manny again. "Doesn't even know how to respect authority. Thinks he can walk wherever he wants, huh?" Without warning, the cop lifted his hand and slapped Manny across the face. A sharp crack filled the air. Heads turned. Even traffic slowed. Manny's cheek stung, but his expression didn't change. His eyes remained steady, focused, not on the cop's anger, but on something deeper, something the officers couldn't see. The cop stepped back, impressed with himself. "That's what happens when you act tough," he said, puffing out his chest like a rooster that had just won a meaningless battle. But Manny still didn't respond. He simply looked at them, quietly, thoughtfully, almost like he was evaluating them, studying their behavior, memorizing every detail without needing to speak a single word. The world around them felt heavier. People watching didn't know the full story, but they felt something was wrong. There was a presence about Manny, an aura, that didn't match the way he was being treated. And yet, the cops remained blind. They had no idea who they were humiliating. No idea who they were touching. No idea that the man they were shoving, mocking, and slapping was someone who had earned more respect around the world than they ever could in 10 lifetimes. To them, he was just a simple man in casual clothes. To them, he was just another easy target. To them, he was nobody. But respect is not measured by clothes. Power is not measured by silence. Greatness does not need to shout. Minutes later, everything would change. These same officers, so loud, so arrogant, so proudly ignorant, would be reduced to trembling statues, unable to breathe, their confidence shattered like glass under pressure. Because Manny Pacquiao would walk back through those station doors. Not as a random pedestrian. Not as a confused civilian. But in full official uniform. A uniform that would reveal exactly who he was, exactly what authority he held, and exactly how big their mistake had been. And when that moment came, when they saw the truth with their own eyes, their world would crumble silently but completely. What happened next didn't just break their pride. It changed their careers forever. The afternoon sun sat heavy in the sky, pressing down like a weight on everyone passing through the checkpoint. The humidity clung to people's skin, turning shirts into damp patches and making tempers flare quicker than usual. Dust mixed with heat, forming a haze that blurred the edges of the road, where vehicles slowed reluctantly as they approached the two officers stationed at the front. These officers weren't known for service. They weren't known for justice. They were known for dominance. They stood with arms crossed, sunglasses on, scanning the crowd not with vigilance, but with contempt. Every person approaching looked like a target, an inconvenience, an opportunity to assert their imagined superiority. Their voices cut through the thick air, sharp, commanding, dripping with unnecessary authority. "Move faster. Don't look at me unless I tell you to. That's not how you hold your ID. Do it properly." They barked orders not because it was needed, but because it made them feel important. They mocked people not to maintain control, but to feed their egos. The checkpoint had become their stage, and every civilian was just another prop. A mother carrying groceries trembled as one officer barked at her. A student on a motorbike flinched when the taller officer slammed his palm against the bike seat, demanding papers he never intended to check properly. People passing through didn't feel protected, they felt hunted. And the officers? They loved it. The taller one, broad shoulders, shaved head, and a permanent scowl, enjoyed intimidation. He walked like every inch of the ground belonged to him. The shorter one, tense jaw, smirking lips, thrived on sarcasm. Every sentence he spoke carried just enough disrespect to sting, but not enough for anyone to challenge him openly. Then, through the heat and noise, a figure approached. Slowly, calmly, quietly. A simple shirt hung loosely over his frame, slightly wrinkled from travel. A worn-out cap shaded his eyes, and his hands were tucked casually into his pockets. He walked with a relaxed posture, nothing flashy, nothing attention-seeking, nothing that matched the chaos of the scene. There were no cameras around him, no handlers, no assistants, no bodyguards clearing a path. Just Manny Pacquiao, a global icon walking like a regular man, enjoying the rare simplicity of anonymity. He wasn't trying to be recognized. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. For once, he was blending into the world instead of standing above it. But blending in came at a price, especially in the presence of blind arrogance. As Manny approached the checkpoint, the officers didn't see a legend. They didn't see one of the most respected figures in the country. They saw a man in simple clothes. A man who didn't match their idea of someone important. A perfect target. Hey, you there! The shorter officer snapped his fingers sharply at Manny, like he was calling a dog, not a human. ID. And hurry up. You look suspicious. The taller one joined in, stepping forward with exaggerated impatience. Yeah, move it. We don't have time for slow walkers. Show your ID properly, not like some clueless civilian. Manny paused only for a moment, not out of fear, but out of surprise at the tone. He'd been spoken to sternly before. He'd faced critics. He'd faced opponents who tried to break him mentally before breaking him physically. But this was the kind of disrespect rooted in pure arrogance, the kind that had nothing to do with protocol and everything to do with ego. Still, he remained calm. All right, Manny said softly, reaching into his pocket. His movements were slow, steady, respectful, even after being disrespected. But respect doesn't matter to the disrespectful. Patience doesn't matter to the impatient. Humility means nothing to the arrogant. Before Manny could even retrieve his ID, the shorter officer grabbed him by the forearm. Not professionally. Not cautiously. Harshly. Don't waste our time, the officer snapped, yanking him forward. People like you need discipline. The taller cop scoffed as he stepped closer, crowding Manny's space. You walk around like you've got nothing to hide. That alone makes you suspicious. Civilians nearby began to whisper. Some squinted, trying to get a clearer look at the man in the cap. There was something familiar about the way he held himself. A certain gentleness in his eyes. A certain strength in his posture. Something recognizable. But the officers didn't notice. They wouldn't have cared even if they did. To them, Manny wasn't someone worth second-guessing. He wasn't someone deserving caution or respect. He wasn't someone important. He was just another man they could shove around to feel powerful. Manny's cap tilted slightly as he was pulled forward, but he didn't protest. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pull away. Instead, he met their aggression with calmness so steady it made the moment feel surreal. If only they knew, murmured an older man in the crowd who had recognized him. If only they realized who they just grabbed. Because the truth was simple. They hadn't grabbed just any man. They had laid hands on Manny Pacquiao himself. A man respected worldwide. A man known for discipline and honor. A man whose uniform, when he chose to wear it, commanded more respect than their badges ever could. If only the officers recognized the face they had just disrespected. But blindness is the curse of arrogance. And the price of that blindness was coming soon. Faster than they could imagine. The moment Manny pulled out his ID, the shorter officer snatched it from his hand with a speed that made the surrounding crowd flinch. He didn't examine it with care or professionalism. He didn't even hold it properly. Instead, he waved it around like a prop in a cheap comedy act, smirking as if he had just discovered something amusing. "This fake," he said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. He turned the ID side to side, pretending to be confused. "Trying to be funny. You don't even look like him." A few people in the line shifted uncomfortably. Some recognized the face on the ID immediately. Some recognized the man standing right in front of them. But they were too scared to speak. Manny's expression didn't change. No anger. No irritation. No trace of ego. He simply lowered his hands and said in a steady, respectful tone, "Please, return my ID. It's real." But arrogance blinds the foolish. And these officers were blinded far beyond reason. "Real?" the taller cop barked, stepping forward until his shadow covered Manny entirely. "You calling us stupid?" Before Manny could respond, before he could even take a breath, the cop struck him. A hard, open-handed slap that echoed across the checkpoint like a gunshot. The kind of slap meant to humiliate, not correct. People gasped. A woman clasped her hand over her mouth. A tricycle driver looked away, unable to watch. Someone whispered, "Wait, isn't that?" But no one finished the sentence out loud. The second cop pushed Manny harshly, sending him stumbling backward and crashing to the ground. Dust rose around him, settling on his clothes, clinging to his skin. His ID hit the ground beside him, skidding across the concrete until it stopped inches from a puddle of muddy water. The taller officer laughed, pointing down at Manny like he was some spectacle for entertainment. "Look at him. He still thinks he's somebody." The shorter one joined in, kicking Manny's ID aside with his boot. "Next time you pretend to be someone famous, at least try harder. You don't even look the part." He bent down and picked up the ID again. His fingers tightened around it. And then he tore the corner, slowly, deliberately, keeping eye contact with Manny as if expecting him to break. But Manny didn't. He didn't flinch. He didn't react. He simply watched, quietly, silently, with the kind of patience that only someone truly disciplined could carry. His silence made the officers angrier. "Stand up," the taller one ordered. "Or do you need help?" He reached forward as if to grab Manny again, but Manny lifted a hand, not forcefully, just gently, to show he could rise on his own. He stood slowly, brushing off the dirt from his arms and shoulders. His cap tilted slightly from the fall, and he adjusted it with the calm of someone who had been through far worse in life. When he finally looked at the officers, his gaze wasn't filled with hate or rage. It was filled with disappointment. A deep, heavy disappointment that made the officers' grins falter for the briefest moment. "You will understand soon," Manny said softly. His voice wasn't threatening. It wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. It was calm, too calm. Calm enough to make the crowd exchange glances. Calm enough to send a faint, invisible chill through the air. The officers, however, didn't feel the weight of his words. They were still wrapped in their own ego, still drunk on the temporary rush of power that disrespect gave them. "Hear that?" the shorter one laughed, turning to the taller cop. "He's giving us warnings now." Both burst into laughter, their voices echoing down the street. "Understand soon," the taller one mocked, mimicking Manny's calm tone. Yeah. We hear that from everyone we discipline." He shoved Manny lightly on the shoulder, as if daring him to fight back. But Manny didn't move. He didn't react to the taunt. He simply stood there, composed and unshaken. The officers grew bored. Arrogance often runs out of steam once it fails to provoke fear. "Get lost," the shorter cop finally said, pointing toward the far end of the road. "And don't come back unless you have a real ID and a real job." They turned their backs on Manny, ready to harass the next unfortunate civilian. Behind them, Manny stepped aside quietly, picking up his torn ID from the ground. He sighed, not out of weakness, but out of sadness for what he had witnessed. Not for himself, but for the kind of men these officers had chosen to become. People in the area murmured softly. A few stared at Manny with wide eyes, beginning to piece together the truth. One elderly man whispered, "They slapped the wrong person. Oh, God help them." But Manny didn't look back. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He simply walked away, disappearing around the corner with the same calmness he had arrived with. The officer's laughter followed him for a few seconds. But that laughter wouldn't last long, because the world was about to flip. Authority was about to realign. And the two arrogant cops were minutes away from realizing exactly who they had laid hands on. Their pride had climbed too high, and reality was about to knock it down in the most humiliating way possible. The humid air around the checkpoint suddenly felt heavy, so heavy that the younger officers standing nearby instinctively straightened up. A black SUV rolled to a stop, its engine humming with authority. The usual noisy chatter among the checkpoint staff went silent. Even the civilians waiting in line sensed something unusual. Something important. The two arrogant cops, still bragging about how they handled that wannabe Pacquiao, barely glanced toward the vehicle. Probably another boring inspection, one muttered, yawning. Yeah, the other snickered. Let's hope it ends fast. I'm tired of dealing with peasants today. But then the door of the SUV opened, and the world around them stopped. A polished black shoe stepped out. Then another. And standing tall, composed, and impossibly familiar, was the same man they had slapped, shoved, mocked, and humiliated just minutes earlier. Except now he wasn't wearing a simple shirt and worn cap. He was wearing a crisp official uniform, perfectly fitted, perfectly pressed. His rank patch gleamed under the sun. His badge wasn't just shining, it was blinding. His posture radiated command, confidence, and controlled strength. This wasn't some old man. This wasn't a nobody. This was Manny Pacquiao. Senator. Global icon. National hero. A man whose name carried more weight than their entire station combined. The two cops froze as if their souls were yanked out of their bodies. The taller one blinked rapidly. No, that's not. The other grabbed his arm, trembling. It is him. We slapped Manny Pacquiao. We shoved him. Their words collapsed into silence. Because Manny was walking directly toward them. Not rushing. Not angry. Just walking with the calm, powerful presence of a man who didn't need to raise his voice to command a room. The other officers at the checkpoint immediately saluted. Sir. Good afternoon, sir. Welcome, Senator. But Manny didn't look at them. His eyes were locked on the two officers who had treated him like trash moments before. The terrified cops tried to stand straight, but their knees were shaking uncontrollably. Sweat rolled down their temples. Their lips quivered as fear gripped them tighter than any handcuffs ever could. When Manny stopped in front of them, the silence was deafening. The taller cop swallowed hard. "Yes, sir, we." Manny lifted a hand gently, silencing him without effort. "No excuses," he said softly. Those two words hit harder than any punch he'd ever thrown. The shorter cop felt his breath catching in his chest. His mind replayed the slap he delivered earlier, casual, disrespectful, confident. Now he felt that same hand turning ice-cold. "Sir, we didn't know," he stuttered. "You didn't care to know," Manny replied. His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was disappointed, deeply, painfully disappointed. And somehow, that hurt more. The checkpoint officers watched in stunned silence. No one dared to move. No one even dared to blink. Manny continued, "You abuse your uniform. You abuse your authority. You humiliate the people you swore to protect." The taller cop's vision blurred. His throat tightened. He wished desperately that this was a nightmare he could wake up from. Manny stepped closer, his calm expression sharp as a blade. "You saw a simple man," he said. "A quiet man. And you thought that gave you the right to hurt him." He paused. "And now, you see the uniform. And suddenly you stand straight." Shame crawled all over their skin like fire. Manny's voice deepened, steady as steel. "True respect is shown even when no one is watching." One of the cops broke entirely. His legs gave out, and he dropped to his knees. "Sir, please. We're sorry. We didn't." Again, Manny silenced him with a gentle gesture. "You will answer for what you did," he said. "Not because I am Manny Pacquiao. Not because I hold a title. but because no Filipino deserves to be treated the way you treated me." The station commander, having rushed out after hearing the commotion, arrived pale and frantic. "Senator Pacquiao, my deepest apologies. This behavior is unacceptable. Officers, stand at attention." But the two cops couldn't even lift their heads. They were shaking too much. Manny looked at the commander. "We will discuss their consequences inside." Then he turned back to the two disgraced officers. "You told me to stay in my lane," he said softly. His eyes didn't hold anger, only truth. "Today, you will learn yours." And with that, Manny walked past them and entered the building, his presence slicing through the air like a blade of justice. The two cops remained frozen in place, drenched in sweat, their pride shattered, their careers hanging by a thread. Because one simple truth now echoed in their minds. They didn't just slap a man. They slapped a legend. The moment Manny stepped inside the police compound, the atmosphere transformed completely. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Chairs stopped creaking. Pens froze above paperwork. Every officer who caught sight of him jolted upright and snapped into a perfect salute. "Sir." "Welcome, sir." Their voices echoed across the courtyard, disciplined and respectful, nothing like the chaos outside minutes earlier. But behind Manny, dragging their feet like prisoners, were the two cops who had slapped him. They couldn't even raise their heads. Each step felt like it dragged another chunk of their remaining pride away. Manny didn't look back at them. He didn't need to. Everyone inside already sensed something monumental had happened. A young officer whispered to his colleague, "Isn't that Senator Pacquiao?" Another replied, "What did those two do? Why are they shaking like that?" Whispers spread like wildfire as Manny continued walking through the compound, the sound of his boots echoing sharply against the cement floor, each step filled with purpose and authority. The two cops followed behind, their breathing shallow, their minds in freefall. Inside the main hall, the senior commander stood ready, posture stiff, face serious. "Senator Pacquiao, sir. We are honored by your presence." Manny nodded politely. Then he turned. The two officers swallowed hard as he slowly walked back toward them. The entire room went silent. Manny stood in front of them, close enough that they could see the calm, measured expression on his face. Not anger. Not revenge. Something far more intimidating. Principled authority. He tilted his head slightly. "So," he said softly, "do I still not look like myself?" The words cut deeper than any shout. The taller cop immediately dropped to his knees, hands trembling. "Sir, we didn't know. We're sorry. We didn't recognize." The shorter one followed, kneeling so fast his knee cracked on the floor. "Please, sir. We didn't mean." Manny raised a hand, stopping their excuses instantly. "That's the problem," he said quietly. "You don't respect people unless you think they're important." The room remained painfully still. Several officers lowered their eyes, ashamed, not because they were guilty, but because they knew Manny was speaking a hard truth about a flaw in their system. A truth many ignored. Manny slowly paced in front of the kneeling officers. His tone remained calm, but each word carried weight. "You saw an old man in simple clothes. You saw no cameras, no spotlight, no title." He stopped walking, turning sharply toward them. "And so you thought you could hit him?" Both officers flinched. Manny's voice grew firmer. "You don't get to choose who deserves respect. Your badge already chose for you." The senior commander braced himself, knowing a reckoning was coming. Manny took a breath and faced him. "Commander." "Yes, sir." The commander stood straight. "These two need to be retrained." You could hear the officers' hearts drop. "Fully," Manny added. "From the ground up." Gasps rippled through the room. Full retraining meant months of discipline, psychological evaluation, daily drills, community service, and strict supervision. Their entire careers would effectively restart from zero. The taller cop's voice cracked. "Sir, please, we'll do anything." "That is exactly what you should have been doing from the beginning," Manny replied. Manny crouched slightly so he could look them directly in the eyes, not with hatred, but with a sharp, cutting honesty. You don't get to wear that uniform just because you passed a test years ago, he said. You earn it every single day. Through your actions. Through your choices. Through how you treat the people who trust you. He stood up again. The shorter cop clutched the edge of his cap, holding back tears. Sir, we were wrong. We know that now. Please, forgive us. Manny's expression softened slightly, but only slightly. I'm not here to destroy your careers, he said. I'm here to stop you from destroying someone else's life. Those words landed with thunderous impact. The commander nodded, already understanding Manny's intention. Manny continued. Respect. He gestured around the room. Is not optional. He pointed toward their badges. It is your duty. The two officers bowed their heads deeply, tears dripping onto the floor. They knew they weren't being punished out of spite, but out of the necessity to reform, to improve, to change. Because they had crossed a line that should never be crossed. A line Manny had just redrawn for the entire station to see. The senior commander saluted. Senator, we will begin their retraining immediately. Manny gave a firm nod. Good. Then he looked once more at the trembling officers. You made a mistake, he said. But what you do next will decide who you become. And with that, Manny turned away, his authority shaking the room more than any punishment ever could. Because the real twist wasn't that they slapped a famous man. It was that he chose to teach them, instead of destroy them. The two officers were escorted immediately from their posts, their boots echoing loudly against the concrete floor with each reluctant step. Every eye in the compound followed them, the usual chatter replaced by a thick, almost tangible tension. They had been stripped of their field duty privileges, their pride reduced to nothing more than a trembling shadow of its former arrogance. They were assigned mandatory discipline training, a program designed not to humiliate, but to rebuild, to reteach the principles they had so carelessly ignored. Every day, they would drill, practice protocols, and learn to respect authority in all its forms, not just the forms they wanted to recognize. Behavioral correction sessions would follow, where supervisors would dissect their mistakes, ensuring that their egos could no longer interfere with justice. And a final warning was etched permanently into their personnel files, a reminder that authority is not a license to belittle or harm, and that arrogance carries consequences. Manny Pacquiao watched all of it from a distance. He did not gloat. He did not raise his voice. There was no spectacle, no show of power. He understood the true weight of leadership, the ability to correct without destroying, to guide without humiliating. Firing the two officers would have been easy. Public humiliation would have satisfied the onlookers' sense of justice. But Manny knew that real change comes from choice, not fear. As he walked toward the exit of the compound, the remaining officers snapped to attention, their salutes sharp and respectful. Even those who had not witnessed the earlier confrontation felt the shift in atmosphere, sensing the gravity of what had just occurred. The air was thick with a lesson that could not be ignored. Manny paused just at the edge of the entrance, turning his gaze back to the compound. His voice was calm, steady, carrying the weight of authority and experience. If you cannot treat a simple man with dignity, he said, projecting the lesson to all present, then you cannot be trusted with a badge. The words hung in the air like an unspoken command. Every officer absorbed them, realizing that respect is not given to the powerful or the famous, but earned through every interaction, every choice, every moment. The two officers, now seated in a small office awaiting further instructions, could hear Manny's words echoing in their minds. Shame mingled with realization. They had believed authority was something to wield, something that could elevate their egos and satisfy their need for dominance. Instead, authority was a responsibility, a sacred duty to serve, protect, and uphold dignity. Outside, the crowd of civilians who had witnessed the earlier events began to murmur quietly. A woman in a sari whispered to her companion, "He could have destroyed them. He could have humiliated them in front of everyone. But he didn't." A young man nodded, his eyes wide with admiration. "That's true power," he said softly. "That's respect." Inside the compound, Manny adjusted his uniform slightly, the badge gleaming in the late afternoon light. Every step he took as he moved away reinforced the lesson. Leadership isn't about fear. It's about accountability. Discipline isn't about punishment. It's about growth. And true respect isn't commanded, it is observed, internalized, and returned. The two officers would never forget the weight of that day. Every instruction during their retraining would be magnified by the memory of that quiet, composed man who could have crushed them but chose instead to guide them toward the correct path. Every correction they received would echo Manny's calm authority, a constant reminder that humility is the foundation of competence. As Manny's figure receded from sight, the compound slowly exhaled. The tension dissolved, replaced by a newfound sense of order and purpose. Officers returned to their duties, heads held high, aware now that every action carried consequences far beyond immediate observation. Respect, they understood, is not optional. It is the essence of integrity, the invisible force that governs justice itself. For the two officers who had learned their lesson the hardest, this day would mark a turning point. They would remember it every time they wore their uniform, every time they interacted with the public, every time they faced a situation that tested patience or authority. They would remember the quiet, unwavering presence of the man who taught them that power without respect is meaningless, and that ego unchecked can only lead to downfall. Manny Pacquiao had left more than a lesson. He had left an imprint on the soul of the compound. His departure was silent, uncelebrated, yet profoundly felt. The memory of his authority, tempered by wisdom and restraint, would linger long after his shadow disappeared from view. The two officers, the entire team, and even the civilians outside would carry this lesson forward, a vivid reminder that humility, dignity, and respect are the true measures of strength. In the stillness that followed, the lesson resonated clearly. Authority is a responsibility, respect is a duty, and every action, no matter how small, shapes the world around you. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the compound, yet the lesson of the day remained brighter than any light. Every officer, every civilian, and even the two humbled cops carried the weight of what had just transpired. It wasn't about a slap. It wasn't about an ID. It wasn't about fame or recognition. Respect, they realized, is not measured by uniforms, titles, or fame. You don't need a badge, a medal, or a reputation to earn it. True respect is revealed in the way you treat someone who appears powerless, someone who seems like nobody. It's in the small moments of consideration, the quiet acknowledgement of another person's dignity, the patience you show when no one is watching. And it's in the restraint you exercise when arrogance tempts you to belittle. The two officers, now seated in the retraining room, could still feel the echo of Manny Pacquiao's presence. Each word he had spoken replayed in their minds. You don't respect people unless you think they're important. They realized how much truth it carried, and how much it applied not only to them but to anyone who misused authority. Around the compound, officers reflected silently on their own behavior. A young recruit thought about how often he had dismissed the complaints of civilians. Another officer remembered a senior colleague berating someone in public simply to assert dominance. Each moment now felt different, heavy with accountability. Arrogance, they understood, doesn't just harm others, it destroys your own career, your own integrity, your own future. Meanwhile, the crowd outside who had witnessed the confrontation with Manny whispered among themselves. They marveled not at his fame, not at his physical accomplishments, but at the way he handled the situation. Calm, composed, and just. He didn't retaliate out of anger. He didn't humiliate the arrogant. He simply enforced justice, guided the wronged toward understanding, and restored order through wisdom. This was humility in action. This was strength wrapped in restraint. It was the kind of leadership that inspires change rather than fear. And that, they realized, is the true measure of power. Manny's steps as he left the compound were quiet, but they left a lasting imprint. Each officer's mind replayed the lesson. Dignity must be afforded to every person, regardless of status. One misjudgment, one act of disrespect, can shatter lives, reputations, and careers. And conversely, humility, simple, steadfast humility, can restore, uplift, and transform even those who have gone astray. The two officers who had been humbled looked at one another with a mix of shame and resolve. They understood that redemption would not come from excuses. It would come from their actions moving forward. Every encounter they had, every decision they made, every citizen they interacted with would now carry the weight of today's lesson. They would remember Manny Pacquiao not as a celebrity or a politician, but as a symbol of integrity, a living reminder that respect cannot be commanded, it must be earned, by everyone, everywhere, all the time. As the evening breeze swept through the compound, a silence settled, not awkward, but reflective. The civilians who had witnessed the events felt the gravity too. They knew that respect is a universal principle, not a selective privilege. Every human being deserves dignity. Every interaction matters. Every choice you make leaves a mark, and sometimes that mark is irreversible. Arrogance, they realized, can destroy careers. It can ruin reputations. It can even erode the moral foundation of those entrusted to protect and serve. Humility, on the other hand, saves lives, restores trust, and elevates the individual while uplifting those around them. It's not about winning battles. It's about winning respect, quietly, consistently, without needing to assert dominance. And this was the final lesson Manny left behind. Not with a fight. Not with anger. Not with punishment. But with calm authority, unshakable integrity, and a steadfast belief in the dignity of every person. The compound, the officers, and the civilians all carried this lesson forward, knowing it would shape the way they treated others for the rest of their lives. If you believe, like Manny did, that every human deserves dignity, then don't just watch this story and forget it. Remember it. Live it. Practice it. Type respect in the comments. Tell the world where you are watching from. Let your voice be heard, because each one of us has the power to uphold dignity, to fight arrogance with humility, and to create a world where respect is not optional, it is universal. The lesson doesn't end here. It continues in your actions, in your words, in every moment you choose to treat someone with fairness, patience, and recognition of their humanity. And in doing so, you honor not just yourself, but the very essence of what it means to lead, to serve, and to live with integrity. Respect, humility, and dignity. These are the marks of true strength, and the legacy of one man who reminded an entire station, and an entire audience, that greatness is measured not by how you command attention, but by how you treat the unnoticed, the quiet, the nobody, who may one day change everything.